Welcome to another episode of Experience the Truth. Today, we're eating fruit kebabs and on the Nile River.
Cruising down the Nile.
It's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool because there's no murders that have happened on it so far.
Yeah, not yet.
Who is the detective in that movie?
Hercule Poirot.
Oh, yeah. Well, he didn't make the ship, so
Yeah, I think we're safe there.
You think
I'm just
we're
looking
okay?
for a Nile crocodile.
We're not going to see any. They said we're on the north side of it. Yeah. Would you have went and swam with them?
No, not because of the danger, but because the water's so dirty.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh, and you're showering in that.
Yeah, is that the water where you see?
They just pump it into the boat.
Yeah.
So we are on a cruise on the Nile River in Egypt on our way to Luxor. You can look on your GPS to know where that's at. Pretty incredible. And with us, we have a real life archaeologist in the flesh. Normally you're in the office and now you're with us.
I know.
Jeremy Stein. And if you watched our podcast any length of time, you know Jeremy. If you've went on any of our tours, you know Jeremy. And so you'll be able to connect with him. You know, he is very knowledgeable in these things. And we've been on, so far it's about 7 or 8 days in Egypt, and that's what we're going to talk about today. It's pretty cool, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's weird when you say 7 or 8 days. It's been that long. We saw a lot.
A lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff. And so I'm excited to break down the connection between Egypt and the Bible.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's hard for them to make a connection to Egypt. They know it has a place in the Bible. You see Egypt, and I think like we do that in history. Like we're so fixated on Israel that you really don't see anything else around Israel as being important and how it plays a part. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about that. And one of the things that's crazy is everything in Egypt is older than old.
Yeah.
I mean, you go back to America and you talk about the Civil War and you're like, that's just recent history compared to some of the stuff here, 4,000 or 5,000 years old. I mean, that's been pretty impressive, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, because your point, I mean, we looked at mummies that are thousands of years old.
That was cool.
And I thought the Washington Monument and Abraham Lincoln statue was impressive before. And it's crazy.
What's crazy about that too, if you've never been to Egypt, it's not just a few mummies. I mean, there were a bunch of mummies that you look at and you see. It's pretty cool to actually see their facial expressions. You know, imagine if the rapture had occurred right then and they just start going up first. What would that have been like?
It's funny too, because we're only seeing really the royal mummies, the ones of great importance. But everybody in that world basically got mummified. I mean, even Joseph gets mummified. That's what we're told inside the Bible. When it's talking about that they bring his bones or his body out of Egypt because he's living in the Egyptian culture, he gets mummified. And so it was just part of that world. And so what you actually have when the British and the French first came here, they started coming across these mummies. It was such a fascination to them. They used to take them and ship them back to Paris and to London and have mummy unwrapping parties.
What?
Where everybody would come over the house. Yeah. Rich person would buy a mummy and they come over and they unwrap them. And then there's some stories about like the stuff that they would do that they thought like, oh, what if I eat them or something like that, or mix them into a tonic. Like it got weird after a while. But at first it was like such a fascination of like, everybody come over and we're going to unwrap a mummy.
Oh man, Europeans.
I wonder why we don't mummify people anymore. I mean, we bury them. You don't want to be mummified?
No, don't touch me.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that I think everyone thinks of when you think of Egypt is the pyramids. And we were able to go see the pyramids. And we came a day early because of flight stuff. We had to come a day early to golf in the shadow, which was incredible. But these are, I mean, when you think of the pyramids, they're incredible. And when you see them in pictures, they're incredible. But when you see them in real life, you just can't hardly believe you're looking at it. And
I'm here right now. That was the weirdest thing. You see them in movies, and then you're standing there. I'm like, those are the pyramids. That's crazy.
And I was thinking to myself, since we have such a renowned archaeologist in our presence, can you explain to us did the aliens build the pyramids? I mean, everybody wants to know.
This turned into late night Discovery Channel.
Yeah.
You've got
Joe
all
Rogan podcast.
the tin hat wearer.
Right. Well, we have an Egyptian guide as well that comes with and is part of the tour. And he has said that no one can figure out how they finished the top part of the pyramids.
That is true, yes.
That they have no idea how that happened or what took place during that time.
Yes.
So partly, but surely if the aliens didn't do it, I mean, how did the Israelis come up? How did the children of Israel come up with it to be able to build the pyramids?
I hate to burst your bubble, and I know this has become something that's very popular in the modern day, especially I think Ben Carson, back in the day when he was running for president, had made a statement that it was Joseph and the Israelites that built the pyramid. The reality is that the pyramid comes centuries before Israel is ever in the land here. When Abraham, who's the first person that we really focus on coming in the land here, it's usually estimated that Abraham's coming kind of at either the end of the first intermediate period or the years following right after that. And he is maybe somewhere around 1800 BC. By that point, the pyramids would have been 800 years old. Wow. Pharaoh Djoser, who builds the first pyramid, is dated to around that. And then the pyramids of the 5th dynasty, which are the most famous, the 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids are the ones that we read about the most. They're hundreds of years earlier. And so the Israelites never have anything to do with the pyramids, and nor does the text of the Bible tell us that. The focus of what they're being used for slave labor on is to build the storehouses and the cities of Pyramses and the other areas inside the Goshen of the Nile River Delta. But when we're talking about how the pyramids themselves get built, I mean, you can get anything done when you've got an unlimited amount of slave labor, basically. And Israel was not the only people group that was in slavery here in the history of Egypt. Egypt is conquering from about halfway through Africa down to Nubia and Kush, what we would call modern day Sudan and Ethiopia, all the way up to, at times, modern day Turkey. I mean, they have a massive empire that starts around 3200 BC when Pharaoh Narmer unites Egypt up until really the days of Alexander the Great. That's when Egyptian autonomy basically falls apart completely. That's when they're conquered by the Greeks. I know Cleopatra always is known as a Greek queen, but she's actually, a Egyptian queen, but she's actually a Greek queen who's supplanted by one of Alexander the Great's generals. She's a descendant of his. And so you have Egyptian autonomy for let's say close to 3,000 years. They conquer so many people groups and have so many different groups of slaves, and they use them all to build the great wonders that we've seen already. And there was amazing technology that they knew. I mean, we have gone through multiple rises and falls of empires and people groups. And in the ancient world, what happened oftentimes when you got conquered is that your stuff was destroyed by the conquering people in order to show their greatness over you. It's not until the later ages, really the time of the Persians and more so the Greeks, that you preserved the information and the technology of those you were conquering. And that's when we start being able to develop, building methods and things like that. But there are plenty of things from the ancient world that clearly they had amazing building properties that we don't know. We know some of the techniques. I mean, oftentimes we'll see depictions of lots of slaves that are pulling these large blocks that are on wooden rollers. But most scholarship would actually say now that they cut these blocks into squares, and then they would build kind of half log type things on the bottom. And when you take a square roller and roll it like that, it actually will roll just about perfectly. There's an example that I think they did at MIT where they had a bike with square wheels that went on this, and you could ride it like it was a regular bike, just around on that type of roller. And so it's just the physics of it. They were able to figure out these physics very, very early, and they used them. And how they finished the top, we don't really know. The tops were ornately done. You'd have what's called a pyramidion that would sit on top of them that would be beautifully cut. And today we'd think, you have a crane that lifts it it up. But in that day and age, it doesn't make sense how they would do that unless workers physically carried it up, which is, if you're going to ask me how I thought it would be done, it would be that. And you're going to lose a couple along the way, probably. It is so dangerous to climb up the pyramids. Even today, when we got here, people are saying, can we climb up the pyramids? And I'm saying, yes. People were thinking I was talking about the outside of the pyramids. We climb up in the inside of the pyramid because the Egyptian government doesn't allow anybody to climb up the pyramids because it is such a danger and it's such a liability. Now, you take a few dozen slaves and tell them to carry this big block up to the top and put it on, you're going to lose a few up there, but they don't care about that. They're slaves.
Expendable.
Exactly it. So if all your slaves are expendable in that aspect, then yeah, you can get a lot done.
Yeah.
And it's a pyramid, so at the top is a point. It's not like you can throw a rope over the other side and pull it up the side. And we climbed climbed up to the door to go into the pyramid, and it's not totally smooth, but it would have been much smoother then than it is now. So how do you climb up the side of a pyramid? You know, how do you get up? They had to have something. What I think one of the things that I've noticed being in Turkey and some of the other places, especially in Turkey, we have this idea that we're smarter than everybody else in history.
Yeah.
You know, that somehow we're we just know more and we're able to. Yeah. And I think in many ways we become more lazy because we have cranes and some where they actually used physics in day-to-day life for everything and figured it out. They weren't cavemen. You know, they're not hiding in caves. And maybe we're not getting smarter. Maybe we're not getting smarter. Maybe it's going the other direction and what we're able to do. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I thought that was the big thing that people think, that we're constantly progressing. And just because you got a smartphone in your pocket doesn't mean that you're, as capable as people thousands of years before, because the art and the structures that we see, it doesn't, you go there, it doesn't make sense how that even is possible. So it's interesting. You brought that up. I was going to say that.
And even with so these pyramids are tombs of the kings, right? And it's pretty cool because here's a word for you: cartouches. A cartouche is an oblong. It looks like a hippodrome almost in a sense. It's an oblong oval or a circle that's stretched. And it's a sign of royalty and then you put your name in that if you're a king. And I have no idea why I brought that up, but
he's just excited. He wanted to show people that he knows that word. That's he's very excited about.
Say it with the cartouche. Anyway, I'm trying to impress the archaeologist.
I was going to say.
That's what I'm trying to do.
I've been listening.
And then while I was trying to impress him, I just revealed that I have no idea what I'm talking about. So these temples are tombs, and they're in massive tombs, right?
Yeah.
And when Alex and I were out, because we're doing some filming for our series in the fall called Exodus, and you'll want to be a part of it if you're in our area or not. You can go online and be a part of the fall campaign this year, 2026. But we were talking about how fascinated they are in the afterlife, and they're living these opulent lifestyles. You can understand why they don't ever want it to end, but they're fascinated with the afterlife, and they spare no expense in preparing a burial place for a body in this world. And it's like, if you're going to the after, why are you so consumed with trying to leave? Is it just a legacy? Which is interesting, because then Jesus doesn't even think, he doesn't even prepare for a tomb because he doesn't plan on being there long, because he doesn't turn people into slaves to prepare he literally sets people free from it. And he's like, the tomb has, it's such an incredible thing when you watch the King of Kings and how he responds compared to the kings. And this is one of the first civilizations, right? In the world, like major civilizations.
It's clearly the first empire. When we think of an empire, 100%. And their ornateness with the focus on death, partially it's because they believe that their spirit would come back and forth between the afterlife that it would go into the afterlife, but also come back and inhabit their body. And it passed through, if you remember, the doorway that we would see inside tombs. But yeah, it was, what can I basically build for myself in this life to bring into the next life? And you see these ornate tombs, and the belief is that by decorating these tombs, that's what they're bringing to the afterlife, and giving them what are called those ushabti. If you remember, we've seen them. They're those little blue figures that are supposed to serve as your servants in the afterlife. Because the idea is, in the afterlife, you're going there, and in some ways you're going to serve the gods and in their fields and do their harvest. But if you have servants and others to do the work for you, then you just get to enjoy it. And so, yeah, they spend so much of their wealth and things like that on the afterlife that it becomes devastating for the culture as a whole. We talked, if you remember, when we were at the pyramids, about the first intermediate period, this time where really Egypt collapses. It collapses 3 times, basically, over the course of those 3,000 years. And they got really creative with the names. The first intermediate period, the second intermediate period, and the third intermediate period, till it finally falls apart. And I wouldn't say it collapses, but Alexander, and after the Persians and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and Alexander the Great, finally it kind of does what we think of as ancient Egypt in. But the first intermediate period is really brought on because of this fascination with the afterlife, that the pharaohs are building these massive pyramids. And when we see the pyramids, specifically the pyramids in Giza that everybody is most familiar with, you have 3 major ones, and you have 6 smaller ones that are dedicated to the queens, giving you 9 pyramids total there. And the 3 major ones, there's a large one, there's one that's slightly smaller, and then there's one that's much smaller. And I had multiple people that asked me when we were there, so is the smaller one the first one, then it goes up in size? It's actually the exact opposite. The biggest of them belongs to Pharaoh Khufu. And the next biggest one, is his son, Pharaoh Khafre. And then the next one is his grandson, Menkaura. And what's happening is that you're seeing the decrease in wealth because they're spending so much of the money and so much of the resources that eventually they bankrupt the country. I mean, when we look at the pyramids in later periods, because you do have pyramids after the first intermediate period, they're significantly smaller. And eventually they move away from even doing the pyramids. When we look at the New Kingdom, what it's called, the time when we have Ramses and Teti I and all of these great kings that really bring a zenith period, they don't have pyramids at all. They have elaborate tombs inside the Valley of the Kings, which, yes, are beautiful, but they are nowhere near as expensive as building a pyramid was. Yeah. And so this fascination of death is really Egypt's undoing multiple times over.
Wow.
Yeah, that's super interesting. You talked about setting up the camera when you were talking about it, about the difference between the kings of the world versus King Jesus.
Yeah, right.
I thought that was interesting, how they bankrupt the people, and the people have to suffer for the king's fascination for the afterlife, and it's for his benefit. And then Jesus comes and he leaves royalty and gives it all to bring us into eternal life. It cost him everything, and it cost us nothing, just denying ourselves.
And they load these tombs up because tomb robbers are going in and they're robbing it for a reason. Oh, yeah. These kings load up all these tombs with wealth from this world, and Jesus is like, just leave it behind. It's a lot nicer up there.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I make streets of gold.
Oh yeah,
no problem. You know, it's
no problem.
No problem.
The street vendor. $5, no problem.
Yeah, come back later.
I get your scarf.
The street vendor that says, "Come to me. I help you spend your money."
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because Jesus tells the parable of the man who stored up all his wealth, and God meets him and he goes, "Your life is required of you today."
He's thinking,
I'm going to store up all my wealth, and then I'm just going to live off the fat and the fruit of what I had made my whole life. And God's like, "Yeah, you're rich before man. You're broke before me." Very different in how the Egyptians viewed the afterlife and riches versus how God views riches.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, that could take us right into one of the things we want to talk about for a big part of this. But before we get into that, another question to ask you since you're here. You know, we've all been educated through Disney, which does a great job. It's one of the theological seminaries of the U.S. Prince of Egypt, who, by the way,
That's DreamWorks.
I was about to say, that's DreamWorks.
DreamWorks. Well,
That's fighting words in the House of the Mouse.
so DreamWorks and Disney, I guess. So DreamWorks, and Alex would know because Alex loves the soundtrack.
Oh, it's phenomenal. I don't blame you. Oh, now they've got a Broadway show. Like, I am praying that my wife is a stage actress, and so I'm praying when that one comes around. It's just a perfect one.
He just did that. You see how he dropped that in there? He's like, I'm married to a movie star. He dropped that in there.
I'm like, if she gets in there, then maybe they'll hire me as a Hebrew consultant.
Yeah, right. Well, they could use one apparently because Prince of Egypt got it wrong. Now, we've seen it happen before, you know, when Noah was there and somehow Lot skipped 400 years and jumped into the boat with Noah. But in this case, I think most of us, and we talked about even in the 10 Commandments, which are like our silent generation and baby boomers, some of you got saved on that movie. My mother-in-law got saved through the 10 Commandments movie. And but Ramesses is in it, and there's this connection to Moses, and one of the things we're finding out, and it ties to another king that was here, and maybe let's talk about that, Akhenaten, and kind of talk about how all of that works, because we may have been told a lie. And I know that may shock you, and I hate to undermine the credibility of DreamWorks, but I think in the end,
you get the heart of the story at least.
Yes.
So there's a strong debate amongst when the date of the Exodus is with scholars, and you have the early date, which is dated to around the time of Thutmose III, who's going to reign around 1450 BC, and that's taking basically backdating the 480 years from when the temple is built by Solomon, based on some estimations surrounding that. And we have a pretty solid understanding of when Solomon's reigning, because after Solomon, during the reign of Rehoboam, you have Israel being attacked by an Egyptian pharaoh by the name of Shishak, who is very, very popular here inside the land. You find a lot of writings about him. His name here in Egypt is called Shishonk. And actually, we haven't been there yet, but we will see in Karnak a whole description of what we read about inside the Bible, etched in the walls, of Shishak attacking the whole area of the Levant of Israel, listing multiple Israelite cities. And so people take the building of Solomon's temple, they backdate it 480 years because of what we see in the text. How we understand the 480 years is literal, is this numerology, something like that, is all up to question. And so you have some scholars that fit inside the view of it's taking place during Thutmose III, but then you have a large amount that go to Ramesses the Great for a couple of reasons. First of all, Ramesses the Great, also known as Ramesses II, he is going to serve as really the zenith of ancient Egypt. I mean, he is the one that if you walk through the land and you look at the cartouches, just for you, you'll see his name more than anything else. And much of the buildings that we find today are going to be from his time period. I mean, you go to Abu Simbel, which is one of the most incredible sites here in the land of Egypt. I mean, we had to drive 4 hours to get to it, and everybody's kind of, why are we driving 4 hours here? And you get off the bus and you go see the site, and they say, oh, that's why. I understand now. It's incredible. I mean, it's as beautiful as Petra, just being cut out of the stone the way it is. He does some amazing things, and so people are drawn to, first of all, that power, that authority, that legacy. But then inside the text of Exodus, when we talk about Israel being in the land of Goshen, we're told that they're building the storehouses, the city specifically of Ramesses. And what we don't realize is that there is some editing or some adapting that's taking place by later scribes to the Torah, to the books of Moses specifically. It's happening all throughout the Old Testament period, but it's taking place at times in order to illuminate the text to later audiences. And I was using this example when I was talking to people on the bus. If I am talking about the place where I grew up and I said, listen, Peter Stuyvesant was the first mayor of the city of New Amsterdam. And I asked, who knows what I'm talking about? Nobody had any idea. But then when I used modern terminology, I said, Peter Stuyvesant was the first mayor of New York City. Suddenly everybody had a place and an image in their mind. And even though when Peter Stuyvesant was the mayor, it wasn't called New York City. That came about maybe 100 years later or so when it moves from a Dutch colony onto a British colony. It's still the understanding of this location's name is going to shift over time. And when we stop using certain names, we lose a connection to it. And so we see this happening. For example, we see Abraham, when Lot is kidnapped, he takes his men and they go up to the city of Dan. And we don't think anything about it. But when we read the book of Judges, we find that the city of Dan, up until that time period, was known as Laish. And it's not until the Danites have problems with the Philistines following the failed judgeship of Samson that they have to relocate up there, and they conquer the city from the Phoenicians and they rename it after their heritage, Dan. So why is it being called Dan inside Genesis? Well, eventually scribes are passing down the Torah continually, generation to generation. You have to rewrite it because, not rewrite it, but you have to recopy it because it's going to fall apart if it's being written on papyrus or parchment. And when you talk about the Torah specifically, let's take a time period of the era of the synagogue inside the intertestamental period. The synagogue, you have two separate readings that are taking place weekly. You have the Torah, which is going weekly on an annual cycle, and then the Haftorah, which is everything else inside the Old Testament, the writings, the prophets, that's being written on or being read on a 3-year cycle. And so your Torah scrolls are seeing a lot more wear, which means they're the ones that have to be copied again and again and again. And eventually you get to a time period where nobody inside the land of Israel has any idea what the city of Laish was. The name hasn't been used in hundreds of years, but they know the city of Dan. And so what the scribe does is it changes the name to the modern name so that they can understand it and get the context of it. And I'd say that's what's happening most likely with the Exodus account that we have, is that the city's name, Avaris, is no longer in use. It hasn't been used in hundreds of years, but everybody knows the city of Ramses, which is right nearby. It's basically right next door to it. And so what they do is they change the name out there so everybody has a physical location and an understanding of where Israel is without losing the understanding of their identity. And so that little aspect of the text, because Hollywood doesn't have biblical scholars usually employed in it, they pretend that they do, but they really don't. If you talk to mainline scholars, they all sit there and like, no, these guys that they're bringing on that you see in the credits, they're not publishing, they're not being involved in these type of things for the most part. And so it creates this understanding, and that's how you get Ramses showing up again and again, whether it's in the 10 Commandments or the Christian Bale one that came out a few years ago, or the Prince of Egypt. And it all sells a really good story with it all, but that's just, it's not the reality of it. And that has been one of the things that scholars have gotten caught up on, but many scholars have still landed on that date for a number of different reasons. But then there's been a developing, at least in the last 100 years, focus on potentially another option for the Exodus, or the dating of the Exodus, and that's surrounding a very interesting Pharaoh that we find here in the land, who's called the traitor Pharaoh oftentimes. And his name most commonly is known as Akhenaten. Akhenaten grows up and he's crowned, he's a crown prince of Egypt, but he's not originally the crown prince. He has a brother who is supposed to be in line for the throne before him. And you have Egyptian writings talking about his brother and how great things will be under his brother. And his brother just disappears from the text. And suddenly Akhenaten,
Akhenaten's dad.
His name is Amenhotep III. And so Akhenaten, when he ascends to the throne, he's actually given the reigning name of Amenhotep IV. And he rejects that name and he takes a name upon himself, basically as the divine lover of Aten. And Aten is an interesting god inside the Egyptian world. Aten, as Akhenaten describes him, he's the God that you can't see, that he doesn't really know him, but what he does know about him is that he hides behind the sun. So every time you see him in images worshiping Aten, it's always a sun with hands coming out, and usually he's raising his hands towards Aten. And the idea, the understanding was that he wasn't worshiping the sun, but that he was worshiping the unseen God behind the sun. And what he does is he changes the entire worship system of Egypt from polytheism to monotheism. And that's why he's seen as the traitor king, because how dare you? We have at this point about 1800 years of documented worship of all the different gods and goddesses. And you come on the scene and say, no, we're only going to worship one God. We're going to close all these other temples. This has been a huge point that scholars have been talking about, more so for the last 100 years. Sigmund Freud was really the first one to bring it in the forefront of scholarship. This is before he went into all his philosophy and psychology stuff. He dealt in the theological world. He has a book called Moses the Monotheist, where he makes the argument of a connection between what we see in the world of Moses and what's taking place with Akhenaten. And other scholars have come up with all different understandings of maybe Moses was a priest of Akhenaten, and Moses comes as a reaction of Akhenaten, because eventually Akhenaten is going to die, and those who are loyal to Akhenaten are going to be basically persecuted. What happens is that one of the high priests of Egypt comes to rule over Egypt because Akhenaten's son, very famous Pharaoh, King Tutankhamun, is too young to rule. He's only, I think, 7 or 8 years old at that time. And so the high priest of the land, of the polytheistic system, is able to take control, and he uses King Tut to be able to bring back into the world of polytheism, bring Egypt into the world of polytheism, I should say. And it's been proposed by individuals like Jan Osman that maybe Moses was one of these rejected priests of Akhenaten, and he goes out and he brings his followers and those who are loyal to Akhenaten to Israel, and it's where they established monotheism there. I tend to disagree with that. I think that potentially what we could be seeing is a connection maybe between the events of the Exodus. And I pose this question to my students sometimes when we talk about these different times of the Exodus and the arguments between them. What if Akhenaten is growing up in the time of the plagues and he sees the land get absolutely wrecked by a God that he doesn't understand, and then the plague of the firstborn? What if his brother is subject to that? And that's why he comes to the throne. He comes to the throne as a direct result of all of that. I mean, listen, if you're going to make your mark on history and it's negatively seen, if you're going to be called for the rest of your life the traitor king, and not even the rest of your life, for the rest of history, no, he makes a very unpopular decision. What could motivate somebody to do that? I think the Exodus is a perfect example of what could push him to do that. And he goes beyond just being a traitor king. He does something that's really, I'd say, strange, but then also shows a level of humility on his part, because our very first day here, we got to see a statue of him amongst the other statues of the pharaohs. And you could notice that there's something so different about him, because you look at the statues of the pharaohs of the ancient world, they're always very regal, and their muscles are chiseled. You can see their pecs. They're very serious in their face. They very much like you.
Akhenaten took Alex's form.
Oh, those are fighting words. Akhenaten, he displays himself seemingly as he was seen. He's not attractive. He has a pot belly, which would have been expected of somebody of that type of wealth and at the top of the social scheme. His face is long and slender, and so you have this reality of him like saying, hey, even though I'm the ruler, I'm not anything special. I tend to lean towards the potential that, hey, these things fit in the narrative of the reality and the evidence that we see. And there's this question of biblical minimalism and biblical maximalism of, are you using the Bible to prove the event or using the events to prove the Bible or to disprove the Bible. I say sometimes let the events talk for themselves. And that's the reality of biblical archaeology, or archaeology as a whole. We're not trying to prove anything. We're simply looking at the material culture that we have and letting that illuminate, and then sometimes drawing our opinions or conclusions from that based off the data. And I say you have this data of such a strange reign of a king at a time that fits just about perfectly inside the time frame. It's right in between the two dates that scholars have been arguing more so of any other time. And so I think we might have something there. There's got to be some type of connection as far as I'm concerned.
And what's interesting is the whole point of the plagues was Pharaoh says, who is this God that I should listen to him? It was like this defiant, like, I don't know the Lord. I don't know your God. And then each plague was demonstrating God's authority over each area supposedly protected by these polytheistic gods.
Yes.
And before each plague, he tells Moses to tell Pharaoh, tell him that this is going to happen, that you should know that I'm the Lord. And each one, you should know that I'm the Lord. And it's cool to think that God could have snapped his fingers and wiped out this nation, but instead he humbly walks with them in order that they would know him too. That it wasn't just for Israel, it was for Israel's deliverance, but also for the knowledge of the Egyptians to know that he is God.
Yes.
And if that's the case, that's really cool and a fulfillment of what God's intention was doing. And who knows how many other people, he wasn't popular, but how many people came to faith in that God that they experienced during the plagues, like Akhenaten.
Well, and you have to think, like, I mean, we only see the narrative of God through the lens of the Bible.
Yeah.
And biblical. So we assume there were no other God-fearers in the world.
Yeah.
And there were.
Yeah.
We just don't know of them. So there's a number of things that you brought up in all of it, and what you were saying, that I think things that I've kind of picked up, and Alex and I have been talking about it a little bit in this, because it does, like you just said about history, I think a lot of people just discount the Bible too. You know, it although we see it as more than a historical book, it is also a historical book that has to be part of the conversation that it fits.
Yeah.
And it gives insight to things. That's why so many archaeological studies or finds have come from looking at the Bible and kind of using it as well. But let's go back to Akhenaten, because you said he was the god behind the sun, which is interesting, because Amra is like Zeus, right? He's like Zeus in the Egyptian culture, correct? And and a lot of mythology comes from Egypt. One thing we've discovered is Egypt really is the beginning. It's not Greek mythology. Romans kind of take from the Greeks take from the Egyptians, and even some of the stories that are told that move on. But Akhenaten says the God behind the sun, and Solomon refers it to there's nothing under the sun that's fulfilling. It's beyond the sun. You know, the sun is often this thing that kind of
barrier.
This barrier between the two. And what's interesting that came up from the Egyptian guide that was talking this. So this is not necessarily, I don't know where our guide was as a believer. I think he's a Coptic Christian.
Yes.
But he says, he goes, and I had never heard this before, never knew this before, and it fits in with the worshiping of the golden calf, that when they built the golden calf, like Egyptians didn't worship the item, but it was kind of like a physical form of the worship of their God.
Yes.
And they created these physical forms to worship the God. It wasn't that they were worshiping the material, they were worshiping the God through.
Yes.
And then when you look at Aaron, who is like, how can you be such an idiot? How stupid can you be to make a golden calf and then worship it after God just brings you through the Red Sea? And then it makes more sense that he's coming from Egypt. They form a golden calf, which is something they see as very holy cow, the cow, right? And so he's Egypt. So there's a couple of things you can just get into. That one, these things, there's a way of looking at them as idol, like where they weren't looking at it necessarily as the God, they were looking at it through
representative.
And how much Egypt has influenced their thinking even in this period of time. Like when they got delivered from Egypt, they didn't get delivered from Egypt. They just got delivered from the location and where they were at. And Egypt, a lot of the Egypt influenced Judaism. Oh, yeah. And maybe you can...
Yeah. What's interesting, before you get into that, like just a perspective for you guys listening, because we jump years and years and we're like, oh yeah, it's, next story in the Bible. They were there, how long it was. So you have their oppression, which was 400 years. But then before that, how long would you say that was?
We don't necessarily know. We know that they're inside the land for 400 years. When the oppression starts is the big question for scholars, because it's ambiguous. Some will say, okay, or some will translate it as the oppression. They're under oppression for 400 years. Others will say they're in Egypt for 400 years. We don't know when the oppression starts, because clearly there is a time that they're booming. Life is great here. Yes.
That's why they stay here. And the interesting thing is, if you think about how old the U.S. is and how much culture that we have and history that we have, it's half of just of their oppression. So that's one of the things that stuck out to me of how much they have took and have been ingrained in Egyptian culture. It makes more sense, their struggle with polytheism and wanting to go back to Egypt, because that's who they are. That's who they see themselves and identify with as a people, as this new nation. They have a longer history than we do as the U.S.
And they go into Egypt as a family, not as a nation. So they don't have all the national constructs. No. So the vacuum is filled as they grow into this people group. The vacuum's filled by culture. So maybe...
Yeah, I mean, they definitely have a culture of their own because they are a Semitic people group, which probably plays into how they get into their place in Egypt to begin with. It's oftentimes assumed that by many scholars, both liberal and conservative alike, that if we take Joseph historically, which I do, is that Joseph's rise to power comes during a time of a people group known as the Hyksos. And the Hyksos are defining the second intermediate period in Egypt's history, where they are a Semitic people group who comes and conquers Egypt. And they establish themselves as the pharaohs, and they rule and reign as quasi-Egyptians while keeping their own culture in there. And this is why Joseph, as a Semitic person, would be able to become the vizier, the second in command, because in the normal Egyptian culture, you never pulled somebody from outside to be at the highest spheres. The vizier was usually, if you were the pharaoh, it was your brother, it was your cousin, it was someone that you could trust that hopefully wasn't going to make a run at the throne, that could run everything. Now you're a Semitic person who has come in here and conquered these people. These people are subject to you, and you have an opportunity to raise up another Semitic person. You're going to want to do that because that is solidifying your control to a degree. And so when they come in, it seems that although they're surrounded by Egyptian culture, the Semitic culture is kind of the bubble that they're living in, and that bubble eventually bursts. You have two sons, Ahmosis and Kamosis, who rose up. And notice the names that I just said, Ahmosis and Kamosis. What do you see at the end of those names? Moses. Moses is an Egyptian name. It's an Egyptian identity, and it's taken from that world. You heard of Tutmosis. We talked about earlier, Tutmosis III. You have that commonality and that culture that's already coming into Israel, even to this day, because Moshe, or Moses is one of the most common names in Judaism, even inside the modern day. It's an ancient Egyptian name. But you have this reality. These two brothers start a revolution. One dies, one's successful. They remove the Hyksos. We have this statement that's made about the Pharaoh that says, arose in Egypt the Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. I wouldn't say or translate that he knew not Joseph, but more so is that he could have cared less what Joseph had done. Why? Because Joseph was part of the enemies. He was part of these people who subjugated us, or who took control over us. So we kicked them out of the land, and what do we do to everybody who's loyal to them? We enslave them. And I'd say that's probably Israel's real baptism into Egyptian culture, but they're still keeping identities of Semitic lifestyle amongst themselves, because they seem to fall back into a Semitic lifestyle of a Bedouin style when they're wandering around the wilderness for 40 years.
You know, one of the things I don't want to miss is this idea. I've never seen it really before this trip to Egypt, of the Egyptians establishing these statues or animals of cows, or the cobra, which is an icon of Egypt. It's on the headdress of the pharaohs, and another thing, and I didn't even bring up, was that the pharaohs, the difference between Akhenaten, and the pharaohs they make themselves look very regal, very godlike. Akhenaten makes himself look very manlike. Yeah. Jesus makes himself very manlike to lead people to God. It's just an incredible almost image of something going. I wouldn't be surprised to see him maybe in eternity, just based on what I've heard, and the history and what's told. It'd be interesting to have a conversation with him about how that all happened. But this idea of they like with the golden calf, and it was worshiping through. Yeah. And
how what's interesting is when we had mentioned earlier how our guide was talking about how the animal was a representative of their God that they would worship through. They weren't worshiping that, but they'd worship through in order to worship their God. Yes. And I what came to my mind I thought was interesting, when you look at Jesus, God becoming flesh, he dwelt among us, and that the way to the Father is through Jesus. It brings up what man has tried to do, and Paul talks about it like man feels their way around in the darkness to try to find God. You see, semblances of that in other religions, and when that comes to my mind is that's what we do through Jesus. We worship Jesus to get to the Father, but he's not a material, mute image, mute idol. He's a living God. It's so interesting.
And it's one of the things that you see is you see the distortion of it that takes place over time, because it begins that they're just worshiping the animals. Like you see the early images of them worshiping Sobek, and it's them worshiping a crocodile, or worshiping Hathor, it's just a calf. A horse is just an eagle. And as time goes on, they start mixing the image with man, so that in later depictions of it, Sobek is not the crocodile that they're worshiping through the crocodile to Sobek, but now they've created an image of Sobek of a man or a man body and a crocodile head. And they do that with all the gods because they're trying to draw that connection, or trying to get as close to the God as they can. And just simply worshiping something through it is no longer enough for them. And I've always found that very, very fascinating. And I always, I talk, whether it's Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, the reality is that always we're looking for some type of representation, a physical representation that brings us closer to God, or in their case, the gods. And the reality from Genesis is that we are made in his image, which essentially is that we are his idol. The idol is the representation. It's not the God itself. It's the representation of the image of that God, potentially. And so our call is then to represent God and his image here on earth if we were made in his image. When I look at you, when I look at either one of you, I should see God and his representation through you and through your actions and through who you are, not just the physical nature of it as well. And I think that's what all the ancient cultures are missing. That's why there's always such a strong condemnation, both Old Testament and New Testament, against idolatry, because the reality is that we are his idols, and we're not to be worshiping one another.
So or ourselves. Ourselves. There's so many places I'd love to go with that, and I don't know that I can, because I haven't developed, but that's what happens usually when you start talking. Then my mind goes to all these questions that I would love, because the world keeps trying to bring us to be in the image of animals. I mean, when we, I've often said when we were kids in school, we're told we're mammals. You're a mammal, and the whale's a mammal. Like, no, we're not a mammal, but it's so subtle that you just kind of accept that, and you start to believe you're just another animal. Therefore, we're not animals.
There's a distinct difference in our capacity than anything else.
Yeah. And it's just so, and nobody really knows. Even the people perpetuating it are just living in this. And so let's get to this part about, you brought up that when Joseph was in Egypt, he rose to power because the power that had subjugated or were occupying Egypt as leaders were Semitic people.
Yes, yeah.
And so they bring Joseph in. He becomes a leader where the Egyptians would never have brought someone outside of Egyptian or their own people to that level. That's why he fits and he fills that. But aren't Semitic people only Jews?
No, I mean that's a modern understanding of it, because when we talk about anti-Semitism, but not necessarily.
So explain that.
Yeah.
Where do the Semitic people, like the Semitic people that came in, the Hyksos, sounds a lot like Hittites, not to be confused with Hittites, because they have some relationship in their history of Egypt as well.
Oh, yeah.
But there's some, where are these people coming from? Like, where does this term Semitic people come from?
So they're from, it's anybody inside basically the region of Mesopotamia, and oftentimes it's defined by a linguistical connection, what we call the Semitic stream of languages, Aramaic, Hebrew, even in later periods, Arabic. It's all the people groups that fall under that umbrella in Mesopotamia, in the Levant, even in the Arabian areas. That when you have the languages being spoke, you see the similarities and the connections between them. If you speak Hebrew, there are things that you can understand in Aramaic. There are things that you can understand in Akkadian. There are things that you can understand in Arabic. And it's all of those Semitic languages, the groups of people that are connected by that linguistic base from that region that are all that. But later on, because that region is basically dominated by Judaism, it turns into this idea of when this hatred is against people of that region, really it's being turned against people who are Jewish. And so you get this understanding of now anti-Semitic being anti-Jewish. And that's more of a modern day construct, not necessarily actually grounded in the true understanding of Semitic peoples.
Because Arabs would be Semitic then, right? Yeah.
Natural Arabs, yes.
Yeah, that's crazy. What we see, and more than ever being here, is Egypt's influence on Jewish worship. And I know for some of you watching, this is going to be a challenge. This is going to be a hard part, I think, in our podcast, for people who are very religiously minded in the idea of icons. And in fact, I would argue that there are many Christians that treat the cross like Egyptians would treat the icons that they have. Like they worship the cross and Christ, like they worship the serpent and the stick until Hezekiah destroys it. Yeah. And they were told to destroy it right after, and they start looking to the stick and the serpent. I think a lot of people are looking to the cross like demon possession. You know, we're going to cast out the demon. They put the cross out, like the cross somehow has the power to cause demon. It's not the cross. That Christ died on the cross, but he's not sharing his glory with it. Yeah. And so there are things that we saw when we went into, what was the temple we saw the day? Edfu. We go in there and we see what looks like Solomon's temple, very much like it. Yes. And there's an ark in the Holy of Holies. Yeah. The Egyptians are circumcising men in that day, and you're like, whoa! Only the Jewish people do this. When you fail to see all of history, that you're gonna have these are things that can cause you to trip. Kind of talk about how do we look at that as believers that maybe look back on Old Testament history? How do we look at that?
The main way that I look at it is that we have to realize is that the Bible and the people of the Bible and the biblical narratives, they are not existing and operating and living in a vacuum. They're a part of their world, and especially they're coming, like you said, they're coming out of this culture. God is going to communicate to people in ways that they understand, and in a way that they can interact with him and basically get his calling and get his meaning for them. And if they're coming out of the world of Egypt, he's got to use that to communicate. Otherwise, they're not going to understand what's happening. And he does so with differences. I mean, there's the reality of, let's take the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies is something that you're going to find in, of course, the Temple of Solomon, and then the Temple of Zerubbabel / Temple of Herod later on. You're going to find it inside the Roman world, the Greek world, here inside Egypt. And you go into the Holy of Holies, and the Holy of Holies has an image of the deity. We saw it yesterday when we were at Abu Simbel, that you go in and it's him, Ramses the Great, sitting with these other gods, and it's the place where the image of the deity rests. And in the Temple of Israel has a Holy of Holies, but there's no image of the deity, especially in Solomon's temple, because you have resting in there the physical presence of God itself. There's no need for the image of a deity, because the deity, God himself, rests in there. When we talk about the ark and the processionals in Egypt that take place, they have a processional that the God apparently follows them into the temple, where we see with the Ark of the Covenant that God leads the ark, or the pillar leads the ark, and the ark follows after, as the Shekinah, the physical presence, or what we call the Shekinah glory, sits upon it. And so God is communicating with his people, but showing his true nature and who he is in manners that are different than they understand, through modes and mediums that they can relate with.
And with this, in the temple in Egypt, it is the more important you are as a human, the more layers. So this temple has like 3 or 4 layers before you, and only the king and the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies. And everybody, just like in Jerusalem, and you're able to go into the court. And here, you if you're not anybody, you got to stay outside. But you go into the court, and then certain people can go 1 layer closer, and 1 layer closer, and then 1 layer closer. And there's a curtain that blocks out the Holy of Holies, and it's well documented, and we've talked about it much, how the Holy of Holies, when Jesus dies, the curtain is torn. But maybe kind of talk a little bit about that as well.
You had far more freedom inside the temples of Israel to go in there and to draw closer to God. I mean, we have inscriptions that we have in the Istanbul Museum and the Israel Museum that tell us that how far Gentiles could go in proximity to the worship there, that they were allowed inside the courts and they couldn't cross certain lines. We know that there are places that the women could go. And inside the Egyptian world, it was, what's your caste system? Where are you inside the social classes? If you're not of this social class, you can't get in here. Where inside Israel, it's no, you're yes, there are places that are reserved for the priests because they have duties that they are to carry out and to do. But you were allowed to come and to worship and get much closer to God than anyone ever was able to do, a common person, I should say, inside ancient Egypt. And so it's a beautiful thing to see that if there's a desire of God to interact with his people, whereas inside the world of ancient Egypt, it was, you really only have access to the gods the more important that you are. And that's not just in life, that's also in death. We were talking about the funerals and things like that to pull this back in. But it's only the nobles and the rich people who have these tombs that we're supposed to provide for them inside the afterlife. Think about how many people probably died building the pyramid. Do you think the Pharaoh actually cared about, if he actually cared about the afterlife, cared about their afterlife and what happens with them, and them just probably being in an unmarked grave? No, it was all about the cast of, only I have access to God, or I'm more important because I have access to the gods and you're not, and so that's it. And Israel, it's everybody has access to God. If you are giving your temple tax, essentially your shekel, in order to go into worship, you have access to the Lord.
I think it's so interesting. What comes to my mind is the book of Hebrews, written to discouraged believers that were wanting to revert back to the old system of doing things in Israel, in the sacrificial system. And one of the things that I love what it says is, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to remember the exact scripture, where it says, we have a sacrifice that the high priest can't participate in. Yes. And I think that is like, that gives me goosebumps every time, because in the Holy of Holies, we have now been given access to what the high priest that is still operating in the old covenant, the old way of doing things. We have a privilege that they don't. The upper echelon guy, we can approach the throne of God with boldness because of Jesus. And I think because there isn't really much of a reverence, especially in our culture in the West, it's kind of disregarded, and the idea of holy is behavior, but not understanding really the presence of God and having that respect. I think we don't really understand the value of what Jesus came to do, because we don't operate in that mindset. But it's so cool, like what Jesus came to do, and bringing us the presence of God in himself.
Absolutely. And especially when you're dealing with Hebrews is oftentimes connected with an Essene mindset. And we basically assume that the Essenes, which is probably the community by the Dead Sea, what's known as Qumran, that they're individuals who rejected the temple to begin with because there were issues with the temple, there was corruption in the temple that's clearly made evident inside the world of the gospel. And listen, these temples here, they were corrupt. I mean, it was money-making operations. No matter if you're the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, it's always a money-making operation. We've heard about it again and again of the priest class trying to hold on to power and authority and money. And at the end of the day, these man-made structures, they breed that because man's desire is always to have others underneath them. But Christ breaks all of that, all of those structures, because there's no true need for that in order to get to Christ. I don't have to pay anybody to do X, Y, and Z for that. And even though God ordains the Levites as priests, we see what happens multiple times. I mean, we were talking at one point today about Jesus inside the temple and what he says to the priests when he overturns the tables of the money changers, and he says something prophetic to them that Jeremiah said to the priests in his day, Jeremiah 7:11, basically telling them that God's going to remove them from their place of authority. And what happens 40 years after Jesus that's exactly what happens. The temple is destroyed. There has never been a temple since then, but yet worship still continues.
Well, the Bible says do not judge, Jeremy. So I don't think Jesus should have judged there. That's offensive. I think that's interesting because we did a podcast on judgment. People tend to bring this up with homosexuality. Like, I'm okay with judging just as long as I'm not held accountable to my sin. And then there's no such thing as judging. But when you see the priests of God, they were leading the people astray. And those that should have judged wickedness, that the people would repent and they would turn from destruction. It was their responsibility to do so. But because they didn't judge, because it became a money-making operation, because they were getting fat on the position they were in, they were wolves in sheep's clothing. And you see that over and over again. And that's the anger that Jesus had. I think a lot of times people use the flipping of the tables as a stamp of approval for your own toxic behavior and anger. And I'm like, dude, you have no idea what you're even talking about. But it's interesting. The zeal that he had was because of these guys that were supposed to be doing their job and leading, were serving themselves like these other pagan temples were.
Well, and they're operating the authority that God gave them, and now God is there saying, "I like the talent, the master of the talent servants," and he's saying, "Okay, I'm here now to judge. You went and you buried it. And now, your benefit." Something else that was brought up today, which I thought was interesting, and maybe you can allude to this, and you might want to add something. And the 40 questions that he brought up for ethics.
This will be a good one.
In Egyptian ethics. I think when we think of paganism, and it's something that we've corrected in the past, we always thought that they were atheist, when in reality they worship more gods than a monotheistic faith. And they viewed us as atheists because we didn't worship as many gods. But whenever we look at when you worship all these gods, we always think of it as a very wicked and self-serving like culture. And yet there are 40 questions they would ask if you're going to be worthy. And they go to the other extreme in Egypt almost, where in Turkey, where we saw like just horrific lifestyles. Here in Egypt, there's this ethical, moral lifestyle that they really value, and saying, and it's almost like good works. If you're going to live in the afterlife, and there are 40 questions. Have you mistreated someone? Did you kill someone? And as he was going through some of the questions, it was like he was quoting the 10 Commandments. And I have to admit, it kind of felt like God was trying to connect to a culture that wouldn't, even though they weren't Jewish people, it's like not like God wasn't trying to connect to other culture and people during this. And they almost pick up some of these things. And at first I'm thinking, did they just copy the 10? But obviously it was God that wrote them down on tablets of stone. Kind of allude to that a little bit, because it really does confront, like when you think of Egyptian culture, you think of almost witchcraft and a lot of demonic, the very demonic activity going on, and yet there's this ethical and moral code of sorts.
Yeah, well, I think that's thanks to the Prince of Egypt, Steve Martin and Martin Short's characters in there that are the sorcerers and getting all that. But no, there's a level of morality, and I've actually pointed out on this trip when it comes to ancient Egypt as opposed to Greece, and I think or in Rome, because when we talk about paganism, like you said, oftentimes you think of debauchery, we think of amoral lifestyle, and that was very true for Greece and Rome, but not necessarily for Egypt. And Egypt is developing at a time where you have other people groups that are trying to find law and order, and like you said, God is interacting with other people groups. I mean, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, is a priest of the Midianites, and he is seemingly almost, he's Yahwehistic. He worships Yahweh, he understands Yahweh. And there's even, I mean, when God is angry at Moses for not circumcising his sons, it's Zipporah who goes and does it, which means that she understands the culture. She understands what's required of them. And in anger, she throws them at Moses essentially for it.
What was it that they threw at Moses?
I'm not going to say it. Foreskin fight! No. Sorry. So you have this reality that, God is absolutely trying to interact with people. And listen, we see what happens when the Exodus happens. It tells us that there are Egyptians that are drawn to the God of Israel and go with the Israelites and become part of them. And that's not just to Egypt alone. Look at other people groups. Where does Ruth come from? She's a Moabite who has already intermarried into Israel. There is something about the order and the morality that God offers that the rest of the world seems to be desiring and trying and striving to understand from the very get-go. The creation desires law on some aspect or another. And Egypt is wrestling with that without knowing the law that's established by the Lord, because the law of Moses hasn't necessarily been established, but the law of the Lord is still, there is an aspect of it, what's often called the Noahic law. There's an understanding of morality, and Egypt identifies that and craves it to some degree or another. So like you said, the point that you have this whole, one of the most famous scenes of the Egyptian afterlife is the measuring of one's heart on the scales of balance, of putting your heart against a feather to see if the good deeds that you've done have outweighed that. And that's the big miss. That's the miss for every culture, because our good deeds could never, outweigh the wickedness that we do and the evil that's truly inside mankind's heart, inside its sinful, fallen state.
I think it's interesting that it recognizes the heart. Yes. And so Jesus recognizes as well, it's from the heart, because they take out the heart and they weigh it on the scale. It's funny that cultures, they understand, they have that same idea. And Jesus says the root of all the evil, it actually is an overflow out of your heart. It's not what goes into a man that defiles him, but it's what comes out of him, because it's out of his heart that all of these things flow.
And it's funny because Semitic peoples did not believe that the heart was the seat of the emotions.
Really? Stomach.
Yeah. Actually, more appropriately, the bowels. The deepest part, yes.
Yeah, which is interesting because this is way off Egyptian stuff, but you typically, when someone gets baptized in the Spirit, something happens in their stomach. Like they feel something, it's the wellspring of life, and they'll feel something in their gut that comes up and out of them, which is pretty crazy when that happens.
It's interesting.
What else you got? It's been a great trip.
It has been a great trip. I'm looking forward to them being able to hear the small group series. Hopefully this gets them excited we still got quite a few months before we start the small group campaign.
There's a lot of work ahead, and we'll probably have some more conversations with Jeremy here. But it's a series called Exodus, not the Exodus, although that's kind of what I kind of wanted, but apparently I'm not cool enough.
Kind of go back and forth.
I'm not cool enough.
My Star Wars shirt.
Yeah, right. So it's called Exodus, and we're looking at the 8 icons, at least that's where we're going with it, of Egypt. You're going to be able to see footage of everything that we experienced while we were here. You were telling us there's about 60% more tourists than before.
Yes. Yeah.
So tourism is back up. So you're going to see a lot of. Actually, it's like it almost feels like when you watch the video that you may think we're in China. Because
you're not Chinese tourists here right now.
That's legit.
That's a real
Bus
thing.
is full of Chinese.
I didn't know the pyramids were by the Great Wall.
Yeah.
How close is Egypt to China?
It's actually we see more Chinese than we see Arabs and Egyptians.
Literally.
But you're going to get to see a lot of those sites, and then we're going to make some connections back to us and really practically look at the deliverance and some of the things that salvation takes us out of, and it's pretty exciting.
Calling us out of the world, just like Egypt really represents the world and the systems of the world. And I think, we can disassociate with the scripture because we don't see how it applies to us. But if you read the Exodus, it is the salvation story, and we need in our daily life, there are idols and gods that we still worship, that we need deliverance from. So I'm praying that, as we develop this series, that God would just deliver people from some of the gods that they...
we've talked about this as well. Egypt is different than every other nation around Israel. Sometimes Egypt is like the enemy of Israel, and then other times it's they almost take the position of savior, and they're a friend.
Yes,
they influence so much. I think what really has overwhelmed me is how much Egypt you see in Israel.
Yeah.
Through the years. And then you talked about King Ahab. In fact, we're going to talk about that. Let's bring that in. You talked about Ahab because this was crazy. We've always looked at King Ahab and Jezebel and all those people out there that got a Jezebel spirit. We talk about that.
Yeah.
And Ahab has a relationship with Egypt.
Yes.
He's viewed as one of the greatest king of Israel. I think we've just talked about being the most evil king of Israel. Go into that.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is that there's a time that Assyria is essentially encroaching. It's slowly taking these minor kingdoms, and all of the kingdoms around the northern kingdom of Israel come together, and they basically say, hey, we've all been warring and fighting against one another, but if we don't band together and create a coalition to stand against the Assyrians, we're going to get picked off one by one. And we see that they basically ask Egypt for help in this because Egypt's the biggest, baddest dog on the block at this point. And Egypt is already at a time of decline, and there is even a level of Egypt helping Assyria at times. And Egypt says, no, we're not going to help you, but we will assist you with arms and chariots and things like that if you do this coalition, but we've got to have our guy leading it. And they ask for Ahab to be the one who leads it. And so Ahab leads it. It's called the Battle of Karkar. We only have the Assyrian account of the battle, but the Assyrians claim that they win, but it seems very clear to scholars that Ahab wins because the Assyrians don't continue encroaching on the land and don't come and conquer these people. In fact, it seems that Shalmaneser III is going to wait until after Ahab and his people group die before he even picks a fight with Israel again and goes after Jehu for a time. But it's over 100 years until Tiglath-Pileser III ever comes into Israel. And so you have this connection of Ahab being most politically dominant king of the northern kingdom. He's the wealthiest king. He has the best military that the northern kingdom's ever had. And we were kind of talking a little bit about it because it puts Elijah's ministry into framework, because when he goes to appear in front of Ahab to tell him to go bring the prophets of Asherah and Baal to meet him on Mount Carmel, Ahab's response is, oh, look, here comes the troubler of Israel. And if you think about it from Ahab's perspective, here's this prophet who's saying everything you're doing is wrong, and you're looking and saying, look at all the wealth we have. Exactly, look at all the power we have. Yeah, we're in a time of drought, but look at how all the other nations respect us. Even Egypt has respect for us. What do you mean we're doing everything wrong and God's not happy with us? We just put the Assyrians to task. They're not interested in us anymore. What are you going to do about this? That's the hardship of Elijah's ministry, and it's displayed through Egypt's backing of Ahab and his power there.
No, you're probably saying what I'm thinking. So.
Yeah, the idea of success, like with our mindset, what the world tells you, here, everybody's goal in life is to get rich and live off the fruit of their labor for the rest of their lives so they don't have to work anymore. Be respected by people, power, money. That's all the rap songs. You don't like rap, so you wouldn't know that. But that's the root of it all.
They don't talk about buying silver.
Yeah, buying silver. That's like the goal in the heart of man. I want to be respected. I want to make money, and that's success. And it's interesting. You can have success, but it doesn't mean that God is pleased with you. True success is obedience, and God's approval is what we seek, not being accepted by the world. And what can feel like, I think a lot of times we get mad at God when things don't go our way, we don't get the blessing. But a lot of times following God actually looks like failure and rejection from the world. So what would you rather have? Success and acceptance in the world like Ahab did, or approval from God? And unfortunately, a lot of people reject God's approval to chase man's acceptance, which is sad. We see that a lot with people.
Obedience is better than success. Yeah. That's going to be the measurement in heaven. It's well done, good and faithful, not good and successful servant. And when you think it, like what you just said, people make the statement, successful things grow. Well, so does cancer. Just because the cancer succeeding isn't a good thing. But to hear it from that point of view, like we hear, because it's clear that Ahab was the most evil king that Israel had, but the people of Israel placed more importance on their prosperity than they did on their piety, on following God and being obedient to what God was calling. They really had put more of their trust in their ability. And the fact, and here's another influence, Ahab was able to have success because he was given chariots as part. This is another icon you might hear more about from Egypt, chariots, which made them powerful in Egypt. He brings a weapon of warfare to Israel, not depending on God's plan, but taking carnal weapons from Egypt and bringing them into Israel to use them against their enemies. It's just a reoccurring theme, it seems, in all of this. Yeah. So, did you want to add anything to that?
No.
Yeah, this is it'll be good, and hopefully you got a lot out of this podcast. Our goal is to bless you guys and grow in your faith. And if you're not already, you should join our Bible in a Year stream. We do every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Bethel's Rock on YouTube. You can join us for that and go to our website at bethelsrock.org to download that reading plan. And if you're like, I don't know half of the names that were mentioned in this, you should join us in reading the Bible. It will change your life. I want to thank you guys for watching, joining us for another episode of Experience the Truth. If you like this episode, make sure that you hit the like button, share it with a friend. You never know what that could do in someone's life. Leave a comment, let us know what you thought. And finally, make sure that you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of the future episodes that we post. We love you guys.
And let me add one more thing.
Always one more thing.
Another thing you can do is also look at Center of Holy Land Studies. Little plug.
Yeah,
for
CHLS.
Jeremy here. You can YouTube Jeremy Stein. You're going to see him. If you're part of a church and you would love to go on one of these tours, we've been doing them. There's a lot of them. It's all Bible land driven. They have one to Turkey. They have one to the land of Israel. They have one to Egypt, which is the one we're on currently. They have one to Italy, Greece, combined Italy and Greece. They got all, and it's done extremely well. And Jeremy's not on all the tours. He's on some of them. He actually runs Center of Holy Land Studies. That's chls.com. .org. And you can look it up, chls.org, and you can find tours that they're going on. Some of them are open. Maybe your church isn't large enough, or if you don't have a church and you would love to go on one of these tours, some of them are open and you can just jump on a tour that's already going. Encourage you to do that. It's incredible what you will learn and the revelation that God will show you through these tours. And I really want to encourage that you do that, and you will be blessed. And you can thank me by going on the tour. It'll be a great experience for you.
Yep. Link will be in the description. Love you guys. We'll see you later. And thank you, Jeremy, for being a part of the podcast. That was disrespectful. I never even plugged you. I usually am good about that. Pastor James corrected me there.
I got you, man.
Yeah. That's wisdom right there.
From the Nile River.
Yes.